It's a dark time here in the verse. Every day there's a new round of tech layoffs that hits the news as one company after another announces an adjustment. It's enough to make you feel like you're on the drift with no hope of finding ammo. But it's all shiny, Captain. There's no short of jobs out there to be had. In this wave, we'll talk some tips, tricks, and effective job search strategies from across the cortex to help you on the path to find your next developer job. I should start this with a bit of a caveat. I'm not a hiring expert, I'm not a recruiter. This is all based on my own personal experiences, both as a manager, which I've done for more than 10 years, and as somebody who's been looking for a job, most of which I spent quite a bit of the last 9 or 10 months doing. And I'll throw in a little bit of research on the side as well. Here's some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to talk about some expectations. Then we're going to talk about building relationships. We're going to be talking about resumes, getting yourself organized, talking to recruiters, going out with the interviewing skills, and pursuing that job. Now, there's no doubt we're facing some dark times. A lot of good folk have been put on hard times lately, being sent packing by the big corporations. Well, there have been some impacts across the industry, to be sure, especially in the big tech firms, those FANGs as they call them. That's where most of the destruction has come. Twitter, Meta, Google, and so on. But it didn't stop there. After that, many of the smaller firms that want to be just like the big boys, they decided they were going to go up and be like them as well. Tried to copy-paste all that attitude into their own structures. And they tossed some of their own crew out the airlocks on the way. One thing there can be no doubt about, in most of these cases, there wasn't a real honest financial need to be doing this. Virtually none of these companies was in danger of going out of business, and many of them even recorded record profits during these COVID times. It was strictly one of those short-term attempt to boost your shareholder value kind of propositions. But in the end, it really doesn't matter. They did what they did, and many of our fellow browncoats were dumped out the airlock and left to float on their own. At the same time, we got many of those new recruits fresh out of the academies and looking to make their own mark on the verse. But they've been plowing join the ranks of the job hunters, trying to light their own way. It's suddenly gotten a lot more difficult to stand out in the crowd. So is it all dark and gray? Are we all doomed? No, not really. Yeah, there have been a lot of job cuts recently, especially among those big FANG firms. But there's no doubt that things have changed. But browncoats take hope. There are still a lot of jobs to be had out there. So how do we navigate that current market and the changes that have come about? Let's start with some framing and some preparation. First thing we're going to do is set some realistic expectations. Now, if you've had your heart set on that job at Meta or Google or AWS, I got some bad news for you. Now probably isn't a good time. It's not impossible, and with the exception of Twitter, most of these FANGs have still hired far more people in the last 2 years than they laid off in these past few months. But it's getting a lot more difficult at the moment, and a lot harder to stand out from the crowd. And if you have your heart set on one of those big paying jobs, 200, 300 plus, with all that stock and options and the office with the free breakfast bars and the game rooms, yeah, now isn't a good time for that. Those jobs are really hard to be coming by right now. If, however, you're okay with a job that pays a fair market wage, has benefits, but is with a company that you've probably never heard of, great news! There's still a lot of jobs out there to be had. And while we're talking about expectations, let's talk about the other elephant in the room for the current market: remote work. A lot of companies are pushing staff back into the office right now, and let's be honest, the statements from management that teams work better when they're all together, that's all complete bull. Well, you know it, and I know it. Management knows it too. They don't care. The truth is quite the opposite. Most of us are far more efficient workers when we're working remote. In fact, there have been study after study that says that productivity has gone on the rise while we were all working remotely. But they don't care. We all know the two reasons that they want you back in the office, the two real reasons, that is. First, it's a lot harder for the bad managers to micromanage and control what you're doing when you're remote. They're not there to stand over your shoulder and look at what you're clicking on the screen, what you're typing on the keyboard. And that's the rub. Remote work exposes the bad managers. And then the other reason, real estate. Most of these companies are stuck in these big long-term leases for this office space, floor after floor of it, all that square footage. And those office leases are sometimes set up for years or decades in advance. They have to justify that expense somehow. If the majority of their office just sits there empty most of the time, then they don't have anything with which they can justify that expense. So the result, sadly, is the trend to push staff back into the office. So if you're not in the mood to accept a job that isn't fully remote or mostly remote, you're going to have a bit of a harder time finding something. It's not right, but it's just how it is at the moment. So let's talk about the next step of preparation, building relationships. If you listen to absolutely nothing else I got to say today, listen to this. Always be building relationships. Don't wait until you're searching for the job. That's too late. Start now building those relationships with people in the industry. In fact, start 5 years ago. Seriously, build yourself a time machine, go back in time, and start making contacts. Throughout my career, and this is true for most of the people that I've talked to over the years, they all say the same thing. And I've had this experience too. I've found more jobs through the people that I know than I ever have through resumes being spammed out or talking to recruiters. And generally, when you talk to people, you find better jobs as well because they're recommending the job, not just the company. It may be people that I've worked with previously or contacts that I've made through LinkedIn or Twitter, at conferences, at user groups. It doesn't really matter how I know them, but those people have found me more good, solid, quality job leads than any other method of looking for work. But it takes time to build those relationships. If you wait until you're looking for a job and you start cultivating those relationships, it's too late then. Take the time, make the ongoing effort, but don't force it. If people know that you're just talking to them because you're looking for work, they're less likely to be inclined to help you. Get to really know the people. Connect with them at the conferences, the user groups, on social media. Make comments on their posts. Congratulate them on their successes. Commiserate with them on their failures and their downtimes. And help them out when you can without any expectations of anything in return. You do all that and it will repay. Life's funny like that. I'll be the first to admit that I'm terrible at that stuff. I'm a natural, lifelong, staunchly dedicated introvert. I hate interacting with the world with a passion. If it were up to me, I'd spend my life in a cabin in the woods 500 miles from anywhere. Well, I mean, as long as it had heat and electricity and food and running water and high-speed internet and Amazon next-day delivery and all that. But other than that, I'd be out there by myself somewhere. But over the last few years, I've been forcing myself to overcome that. I've been volunteering. I've been speaking at conferences when I can. I've been getting involved with user groups, talking on podcasts. I've been teaching part-time. I've been mentoring those that are trying to transition into tech. I've been blogging more actively. I've even become a Microsoft MVP for all my efforts. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm grateful for the recognition, but that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to make myself better, to be more involved in the community, to give back to something that has given so much to me over the years. And, you never know when those efforts are going to pay off. I mean, I just started a new job a couple months ago, and that was a direct result of an interview and some people that I talked to 4 years ago, the last time I was looking for work. So it's never too early to build those relationships. It may not pay off today, but it's a long-term investment, and it's bound to pay off sooner or later. Now, before you go out and start looking for that work, you're going to need yourself a curriculum vitae, or, that's a resume to us common folk. So you need to spend some time creating a primary version of that. In fact, even when you're not actively looking for a job, you ought to be updating your resume at least once a year, probably more often than that. Keep it up to date, because you never know when the right opportunity is going to come a knocking. And it can definitely pay to be prepared. Keep a copy of your resume in Word or PDF format. Stick it someplace that's going to be really easily accessible, like OneDrive or on your phone or somewhere that's portable and easily accessible from anywhere that you're at. Because you never know when that opportunity is going to come along. And if you've got it handy there, you can just send it right off while you're thinking about it. Now, I know a lot of people these days use Google Docs, but to be honest with you, Microsoft Office is the way that most of the business world runs. So that's the preferred. If you don't want to do that, make sure you save your file in PDF format, because that's almost as accepted as Word. But most companies prefer Word these days. Enough said. Now, with resumes, there's 2 absolute rules you need to follow. The first is keep it simple. No pictures, no colors, no graphics, no fancy formats, no funny, weird fonts. Just don't do it. And the second, keep it short. 1 or 2 pages maximum, no longer than that. Think about the organization of your resume as you're doing it. All the important parts that you want a hiring manager to see should be located in the top half of the first page. For public postings, hiring managers will receive dozens, if not hundreds, occasionally even thousands of resumes. When they're looking at that, when those resumes that they're getting, they're spending 3, 4 seconds, 5 seconds maybe maximum looking at each resume. They'll skim through the top half of the first page. And if you haven't captured their attention by then, you're never going to do it. So make sure that the top half highlights your skill set and your current or your most relevant or recent position. If they can't identify that information quickly in the first couple of seconds, then they're just going to toss your resume in the circular file or its digital equivalent. Another reason to keep your resume simple is that you're going to spend a lot of time updating that or uploading that resume to job portals at various companies. These portals almost universally suck. You will learn to despise the name Workday with all the passion of your soul when you're looking for a job. These portals will try to parse the information from your resume to fill out their data fields, and they will almost universally get most of it wrong. And then you have to spend all that time re-entering all the information that they should have been able to just pull off your resume. The simpler your resume, the more clearly formatted it is, the better these automated systems work in parsing out that information. So keep that in mind. So you're not spending all of your time typing over all the stuff that you've already typed out a dozen times before. Now, there are also going to be times when you're looking at particular job openings where you want to customize your resume a little bit, make it a little bit more relevant for the position that you're applying for. Well, you probably won't need to modify your resume for every position. There may be specific positions in specific industries or that are asking for a specific skill set, and those are things that you want to highlight more than on any other resume. Let's say, for instance, you're applying for a position at an insurance company, and one of your previous positions, maybe not your most recent, was at an insurance company. So while your default job history is generally organized most recent first, you may want to reorder that job history and put the most relevant job position at the top of the list, and then put the other ones in date order after that. You may also want to add some insurance-specific terminology to the top of your summary, so that kind of jumps out at a person in an insurance company. So there are times when you're going to want to have that specialized version, and there are times when your primary version is going to be good enough. And then let's talk about one other thing on resumes: cover letters. There's a lot of debate about cover letters. Some people recommend them, some don't. As a hiring manager, I never, not even once, read a cover letter. I don't have the time for it. I'm getting too many resumes. I got too many things to do. I got to get right to the point. And the point is that summary of your skills. Other managers do read them, and that's fine. So the truth of it is, you never know if it's going to be there or not. Or you never know if they're going to read it or not. I would say that if you feel the need to write one, go ahead. It's not going to hurt nothing. And it may help. But don't spend a lot of time on it. Just don't. In my opinion, you get far more benefit out of networking, and that's something that we're going to talk that I've talked about already. So the next thing to keep in mind as you're getting set up and going is scheduling your time. I'll be honest, when you're on the job hunt, some days it's really difficult to motivate yourself to get going and get out there and looking for jobs. Searching the boards, making contacts, talking to recruiters, submitting resumes, writing cover letters. It all takes time, and you need to dedicate yourself to the effort. I recommend setting up a schedule for yourself. Put that schedule on your calendar. Put it in there in Outlook or Google or whatever it is you use to keep track of your days. Keep to that schedule. When that calendar pop-up comes up and says it's time to do your job search for a half hour, whatever it is you're doing each day, put everything else aside, turn off the games, turn off the TV, and dedicate yourself for that time. A little bit each day works a lot better than spending 6 or 7 hours on the weekend. So, if you can take a half hour each weeknight and then maybe an hour each weekend day, that's going to get you a lot further. You're going to feel a lot better. You're going to be able to keep yourself going a lot more. And make sure that time is 100% dedicated to the search. Like I said, no games, no TV, no text, no Instagram, no Twitter, and no emails that aren't specifically about jobs that you're looking for. Keep to that schedule. Job hunting itself is a part-time, if not a full-time job in itself. Treat it as such, and you'll find that you're going to have greater success. Next thing you need to do is be organized about your effort. Whatever structure it is that you want to take, it may be a notebook, it may be a spreadsheet, it may be a big whiteboard on the wall, it may be some sort of dedicated application that you use to track your job hunt. Whatever works for you. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that you're going to need to track. You need to know who you've talked to, when you talked to them, what it was that you talked to them about, what jobs you've applied to, what jobs recruiters have submitted you for, the emails that you've sent, the instant messages that you've sent, and so on and so forth. You need to keep all that organized in a single place, but you can easily reference. For me, I use a spreadsheet, and I'll show you here an example here in a second. But you're going to be talking to so many people. You're going to be involved in so many things. You need some way to keep that organized because you're going to very quickly find that you can't keep track of who you talked to about what. You're especially going to take notes after each call or each interview so that you know what you talked to them about. It doesn't need to be really detailed, just a quick paragraph, a few sentences that will summarize the highlights, the key points, the important points, so that you can reference those again next time you talk to those people. You're probably going to talk, like I say, you're going to talk to a lot of people throughout your search. And if you're like me, you're going to have a hard time keeping it all straight. So I write it down, I make a summary, and that way I know the next time I go to talk to them, I can look back and say, oh, I talked to them about this and this and this. And it also helps you keep people's names straight a little bit better. Like I said, my general strategy has been to keep things in a spreadsheet. Let me show you an example of that. So here's kind of a sample of the way that I keep track of things. And this isn't an actual job search for mine. It's just an example that I created based off of one that I did in my most recent search. So you don't need to be too complicated. I just got the date of the interaction, the type of interaction, the company that was involved, the job title if there's a specific one, the person that I talked to, whether it was the recruiting manager or the hiring manager or a recruiter or whoever it was I talked to. And then if I need to follow up on it, I'll put a date here. And then each day I can go through, I can say, okay, what do I need to follow up with on today? And I can highlight that. And then I've also got a second tab here where I use to keep track of the contacts. So I tried keeping, stuff here, phone numbers and email addresses and whatnot on this main page. But I found it was a lot more efficient here because by the time I've added 3 or 4 or 5, 6 rows for the same person, I didn't want to keep putting in that phone number, that email address over and over and over again. So I'd create a second tab and I put the actual contact information here. One other thing I probably should have included on this example is their job title. So obviously you can keep track of what it is that they do and why you're talking to them. And one other reason that it pays off to be organized is as you're going through your job search, you're going to be talking to a lot of people. You're going to be talking to a lot of recruiters. You're going to be talking to, or you're going to be going to a lot of job boards in your own efforts, going to a lot of company websites, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that you aren't submitted to the same job by more than one person. Let's say, because you're going to run into situations, because all these recruiters are all working with the same set of jobs. And you may get 5 different recruiters who contact you about the same job that some company is looking to fill. You want to make sure that only one of those recruiters that you're talking to has submitted you for that job. Or if it's a job that you found on your own, you want to make sure that if you've already submitted your own resume, you don't want a recruiter to submit your resume again. Because they may not notice it once or twice, but a lot of times the hiring managers are going to start to notice when your name pops up over and over again. And that gets annoying for a manager if they get, the same resume from 3 different sources. And it's also another thing that can kind of get you in trouble. Let's say 3 different recruiters submitted you to the same job and you get hired for that job. Which of those recruiters gets the credit? They're going to start, these recruiters, when they start working with companies, they sign contracts with those companies. And those contracts specify that if you get hired and you stay for a certain amount of time, most of the time that's how this works, then the recruiter gets a certain amount of money based on your salary. Well, what happens if 3 different recruiters submitted you and you get that job? Which recruiter gets the credit? That can get you in trouble. And If it's causing legal issues or causing troubles between the recruiters and the company that you got hired for, that's going to cause trouble between you and the company. And you may find that great new job that you get uninvited to be a part of it. So always make sure you're keeping track of who's submitting you to what, and make sure that that you're not letting recruiters, especially when you're talking with recruiters, make sure that they do not submit you without your permission each and every time. Any of the good recruiters, they're going to come talk to you about a position first. They're going to say, hey, I got this position. Here's what it's about. Are you interested? And you say, okay, yeah, sounds great. Go ahead and submit me for that position. There are bad recruiters out there, just like any job. You got good people and you got the bad people. And the bad ones, there are some out there who all they need is your resume and they'll just start spamming it out all over the place, hoping to make it hit. That can get you into trouble and that makes you look bad. So make sure that you're getting, keeping track of all that so you don't get yourself into trouble. And we'll talk more about recruiters here in a little bit. One of the other things you're going to want to do is brush up on your interviewing skills. Spend some time reviewing what the common interview questions are for the position that you're looking for and the technical level that you're hiring for. But you also want to kind of keep abreast of what the common interview questions in general are these days. There are endless blog sites or endless blog posts that will have list after list of common interview questions, things that are going around in the industry. If you get a chance, practice with somebody. Set up a mock interview with somebody. But even if you can't, go through those questions that you find on the web. Ask yourself the question. Say, okay, how would I answer this? How would I answer this? You don't have to think it all out word for word, but think through what your response would be and what the response to what these typical questions would be, what your response to any of them would be. One of the things you'll find too is that it's good to practice even the basic questions, because hiring managers these days, they will ask sometimes what you think is one of the most basic questions. For example, my background is with the Microsoft stack, Azure, C#, ASP.NET, SQL Server, and so forth. I've got nearly 20 years of professional experience in that field. I can't even tell you the number of interviews that I went through over the last few months when I was looking for a job, where they asked even the most basic questions. What's the difference between an int and a float and a decimal and a double? When do you use each one? What's a library? What's a class? What is NuGet? How does async await work? What's the difference between a class and a struct? Explain object-oriented programming to me. These are very basic questions, the kind of questions that you would normally ask somebody who's just coming out of a school or a class or is looking for their first job. But you'll find hiring managers that will ask them to experienced people as well. And there's a reason why they'll do that. Obviously, as somebody who's interviewing and who has a lot of experience like I do, you would think that those are kind of ridiculous questions to be asking somebody who's got 10 or 20 years of experience. But as a hiring manager, I completely understand why we ask those kinds of questions. And the reason is that people lie. I mean, let's face it, not everybody is honest when they're filling out their resume. They're not honest about their backgrounds. And when I was interviewing candidates, I would find, depending on the position and the time, I could find that as many as 1 in 5 had completely fictitious resumes. And probably half of them had at least some kind of exaggeration on it, claiming to be experts in something that they only had marginal knowledge on. It happens a lot, unfortunately. And especially in the age of video interviews, it's gotten a lot worse. So managers have to do things to kind of weed out the liars as much as possible. And one of the things they do is they ask those kinds of basic questions. And if somebody can't answer that, well, it saves you a lot of time in pursuing things. It's kind of sad, really, but it's where we are. So that's one way to practice. Another thing to practice, don't just practice the verbal questions, though. Y'all got to also practice, the technical side. You're going to have hands-on coding experiences of some sort, or hands-on coding exercises of some sort. Maybe like draw your process on a whiteboard. It may be hands-on coding with an IDE where they say, okay, write a program that does this and this. Probably a third of the companies that I interviewed with over the past few months, when it got past the first interview, there was some kind of technical exercise or some kind of coding exercise. So make sure you're practicing that kind of thing. There are all kinds of websites out there, coding katas and code challenges and those kinds of websites where you can go out and you can practice that kind of thing. It's not going to be a complex thing, the coding exercise. And more often than not, they don't even expect you to finish it. They just want to see what your thinking process is, see if you can come up with some basic concepts that you should be familiar with as a developer. Uh, I'm of a mixed of opinion on these coding exercises. I think sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're absolutely ridiculous. You should never have a coding exercise that takes you hours to complete. If it's not something you can do in 30 minutes, then you're wasting time. You're wasting everybody's time. Take-home coding exercises, I'm not a fan of either, although a lot of companies use them. To me, that's kind of indicative of a culture problem in a company, and maybe from my perspective, that might be a company you want to avoid. But it's completely up to you. I'm also not a fan of the long, drawn-out interview processes in general. Going back to them FANG companies and the way that they do the interview process. Most of them, their interview process is like 6 to 10 interviews in all, and it will eat up entire days of your life. I did this just once during this last job search. I went ahead and I interviewed with Amazon, looking for one of their architect positions. The whole process consisted of 2 different recruiter pre-screens, 30 minutes each. Then I had a technical pre-screen that lasted for an hour. Then there were 2 quote-unquote optional interview prep sessions that get you prepared for interviewing with the company. But it was kind of made pretty clear to me that if you really wanted the job, they weren't really optional, even though they call them optional. And then, after all that, there was still a full day round-robin interview process where I talked to 6 different people, 4 of them, kind of cultural interview questions. One of them was a full-on technical interview, and the 6th one was kind of a mix of the both. And each of those interviews lasted for an hour. This was an all-day thing, and it's typically how they do their interview process. After all that, they decided that I wasn't right for their level 6 position that I was interviewing for, but they thought I'd be perfect for a level 5 position. And I thought, oh, great, let's talk about that. So they sent all my info to the level 5 manager. The level 5 manager says, great, you just need to do that whole interview process all over again with my team. And I thought, you must be joking. They said, nope. So I said, drop dead and go to hell. Well, okay, that's probably the stupidest thing that I've ever heard. Come talk to me when you're actually serious about hiring somebody. Well, at least that's what I said in my head. That isn't actually how I responded. I think my actual response was something more along the lines of, sorry, no thank you, I'm not interested. Now, would I ever go through that again? Yeah, possibly. It's an utterly ridiculous hiring process, and it's the absolute epitome of wasting countless hours of everybody's time. But if the right opportunity were to come along, I can't say that I absolutely wouldn't consider it, but I definitely think about it 3 or 4 times. I'm kind of stupid like that, and I like to inflict misery on myself. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is social media. Like it or not, it's a social media world. At absolute minimum, you need to have a LinkedIn profile. Keep it professional. LinkedIn isn't the place for what your kids are doing or what you ate last night, unless somehow that's directly related to the job you're doing. It's also not the place for political or religious discussion or for anything that isn't directly related to your job. It can be a touchy subject, but LinkedIn is meant to be strictly professional, and anything else will probably cause your profile to be looked at in more of a negative light. Now, that's not to say that you should go crazy on all of your other social media. Like I said, like it or not, it's a social media world, and more companies, as part of their background check process, they're going to be taking a look at what you all are posting everywhere, at least anything public. And remember, with the internet, once it's out there forever. There's no taking it back. There's no undo. There is a record of it somewhere. Even if it's not as easy to find, there are more and more of these companies that are specializing and siphoning off all this data, making copies of it, archiving it so that it can be searched. Once it's out there, and you can't take it back. So make sure that you're being mindful of what you post on social media. And when you're getting ready to start a job hunt, that's a good time to do a self-evaluation. Say, okay, what am I doing? What am I posting? Where am I posting it? What are the kinds of things that I'm posting? Maybe do a little self-evaluation and say, is the me of today the same as the person who was posting stuff 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Maybe I wouldn't be the same person today, but it's out there. It's on my record. So maybe I want to clean that up just a little bit before I go moving on to the job hunt. It's another one of those touchy subjects, but it's something you want to consider as part of your search and as part of your preparation. Now let's start talking about the hunt itself. You've got yourself all prepped up. You got yourself organized. It's time to start looking for the job of your dreams. So where are you going to go? Where do you start? Well, the first thing you do is going back to those relationships that you've been building. Start reaching out to those contacts that you've been building up. It doesn't have to be much. Just a quick note. Say, hey, I'm looking for a job, and this is the kind of thing I'm looking for. If you happen to come across anything or know of anything like that you think might be a good fit, let me know. Don't keep pestering people. Reach out once. That's enough. And of course, if you're kind of on the quiet hunt and you haven't made it public that you're looking for a new job, make sure you let them know that as well. Say, hey, I'm looking for a job, but don't be posting about it. Don't post messages on Twitter. Say, hey, you find something yet? Kind of thing, or on LinkedIn or whatever it might be. That, like I said, companies are looking at your social media nowadays, even your current employer. So people notice that kind of stuff. So kind of circling back to LinkedIn, one of the features that LinkedIn has is this feature where you can put a flag on your account that says, hey, I'm looking for a job, but I don't want it to be public. And when you do that, it'll put one of those little icons in your profile, and your account will start showing up in recruiter searches. But it won't show up for anybody who's marked as having the same current company as you do, even recruiters at your current company. So it's not foolproof, obviously. There are ways around that, but it does allow your profile to show up more frequently when recruiters on LinkedIn are doing searches. And that can initiate a lot of conversations. Now, for me, I was playing around with these settings a couple years ago on LinkedIn, and I turned this on for some reason, and I'd completely forgotten about it. I wasn't even looking for work at the time. I was just getting to know LinkedIn. Well, nobody in my current employer even noticed until about 2 months before I left. So, it's not, it may be that somebody notices, it may not be. So just be careful. Just be aware that it's out there, The next thing you're going to want to do is start reaching out to recruiters. Do your research. There are a lot of great recruiters out there. There are some good recruiters, and there are also a lot of bad ones. It's like any job. This is another place where building up those relationships over time comes in handy. You have people that you can reach out to. And when you're talking to them, ask them for recommendations. Talk to them about recruiters that they've worked with in the past. Who would they recommend? You're probably, as you talk to people, you're going to find that pretty much everybody who's been in the industry for a little while has at least one or two recruiters that they like working with when they're looking for work. So ask for those recommendations on the recruiters. Also do your research. Recruiters have LinkedIn profiles too. Go take a gander. If there's things about their profile that looks kind of fishy, like they're changing companies every 6 months, that's somebody you want to avoid. But if they've been there for a while, if they've been a recruiter for a while, if they've been at the same company for a while, or if it's, there are obvious things like maybe the reason they moved to another company is for a promotion or something like that. Do that kind of research on the recruiter before you interact with them, before you commit to working with them. And don't limit yourself to one. I know a lot of people who are early in their careers, they think, oh, when I set up to talk to a recruiter or when I start working with a recruiter, I'm not allowed to work with other recruiters. I'm locked in. Don't ever think that. You can work with as many or as few recruiters as you want to. Don't ever work with a recruiter who tries to lock you in with a contract. Those are the kinds of bad recruiters that are out there. There's one kind of bad recruiter, and you want to avoid them at all costs. You should The industry standard is that you work with any of them. You shouldn't have to pay them anything. They get paid if they find you a job. And they get paid by the company that hires you. They don't get paid by you. So always keep that in mind. Any recruiter who tries to come at from another approach, tries to do something kind of different from that industry standard, stay away from them. When you start talking to a recruiter, when you start initiating that relationship, the first thing they're going to want to do is have a phone call. They're going to want to sit and chat with you for 15, 20, 30 minutes, get to know you. They'll want to get a copy of your resume. They'll want to find out about the kinds of jobs that you're looking for. So they'll talk through that experience with you. They'll talk through your skill set. And then once they've got all that, they'll start seeing if they can match you to jobs that they're looking for, that they're looking to fill. They'll also communicate your information to other colleagues that they work with. So even if you talk to one person at a particular company or a particular recruiting agency, they may say, hey, I don't work in this particular field, or maybe I've got somebody over here. Is it okay if you talk to them as well? And that's fine, usually. One other thing to keep in mind is that recruiters talk to dozens, if not hundreds of people every single week. It's not on them to keep on top of things. It's on you to follow up with them. But don't pester them. Don't call them every day. Say, hey, do you have anything yet? Hey, do you have anything yet? Check in every week, once a week at most. If you haven't heard from them in like a week, say, hey, just checking in. Have you got anything? Have you noticed anything that might be coming down the pipe? That kind of stuff. If you don't kind of pop yourself up every so often, it doesn't have to be every week. Maybe every week and a half, every 2 weeks is fine too. But you want to kind of bump yourself up in their mind every so often. And another thing to remember is an email or a voicemail, or not voicemail, an email or a text message generally is a lot better than a phone call. Phone calls are easily forgotten. Even a voicemail is easily forgotten. You read the voicemail, or you read the voicemail. You listen to the voicemail, and then you click delete, and then you completely forget about what that voicemail was about. But a text message, generally, as a habit, most of us don't delete our text messages, and recruiters are the same. They've got that message in there, and it may pop up, percolate up. Same with email. A lot of us generally don't tend to delete our emails, or we file in a certain way. Plus, one other thing to remember is, like I said, they're talking to a bunch of people. So if you talk to somebody on the phone, you hang up, you don't notice it again, or you don't pay attention to that again. But maybe if it's an email or a text message, maybe the next time you look at your messages, next time you look at your email, it may be 4 or 5 or 10 down, but they may notice your name again. It may spark something in their brain. So that text, that email is a better approach to contacting them. In general, you're still going to want to have phone calls from time to time, especially when you're talking about specific job opportunities. But most of the time, they'll call you. They'll set that up. And remember, one other thing too is that a recruiter is your business partner. They are not your friend. They are not your buddy. They're not your pal. Yeah, a lot of them are great people, and they're great to get to know. But when you're in that relationship, when they're helping you look for a job, they are your business partner. They are there to help you get paid, and by helping you get paid, they get paid. Long term, it's in their best interest to make sure that you're a good fit for the position. But like any position, like say, you're going to have bad recruiters who just try to shove you in wherever they can get you hired, and they don't care whether you're a good fit for the job. They don't care whether it's a good company. There are those bad recruiters out there. They just care about getting that short-term pay. And those kinds of recruiters, more often than not, don't tend to last very long in the industry because they get bad reputations and companies will stop working with them. And candidates will stop working with them. So it's another reason to do your research about those recruiters. Get to know them. Look at their job history. Look at what they've been doing, how long they've been in the industry. So you get a feel for that kind of thing. For those recruiters who want long-term success, they're going to make sure that you're a good match. They're going to make sure you're a good fit for that company, and that it's a good place to be. Because they know that long-term that's going to pay off. You on average, most of us probably stay at the same company for 3 or 4 years at most before we move on to something else. That's just kind of the industry average. So odds are that when a recruiter works with you, if you have a good experience, you're going to come to them again the next time you're looking for work, and the next time, and the next time. And that's long-term opportunity for them. So it's in their best interest to try to make sure that you are successful and that you are matched to the best place that you can be. So that's enough about recruiters. So we've talked about, obviously, the best job hunt or the best job finding methodology is contacts. The second best are recruiters. But you're also going to want to put in some effort on your own. And that's where job boards come into play. There are an endless array of job boards out there. There are industry-specific ones. First, there are generic job boards, things like Monster or ZipRecruiter or things like that just have across tons of different industries or LinkedIn is another one that has its own job board that's kind of spread over everything. And there are all kinds of jobs posted on those. And then you have the industry-specific ones like, Dice and Indeed that focus on, just technical jobs or specific job fields. And there's an endless array of those job boards. Pretty much every government has its own job board. Both at, the federal level, state level, the local level, there are endless arrays of job boards that are out there. Every company has its own job board, that they keep track of. So there's no shortage of places where you can go to find work, where you can go to find jobs that are being posted. So again, that comes back to the organization. Do your research, keep track of where you've posted the job opportunities that you've posted to, so that you make sure that you're not getting submitted for the same job from multiple angles. It's not always easy, because not a lot of times, but sometimes companies don't use the same job description. Sometimes companies don't even show their name, with the recruiter or or on the job boards. Just say a company in this field is looking for this position, things like that. So sometimes it's a little hard to be sure that it's a position that you haven't already submitted your application or your resume to. But after a while, you kind of get used to the common descriptions, the way that some companies operate, and you can find those duplications. But I don't generally worry about that too much with the job boards. But like I said, there's an endless array of them out there. Each one of them, when you upload your resume, we'll try to parse it. That's another reason, keep your resume simple. So when it does that parse, that it's collecting as much information as it can automatically, so you don't have to type it all in again. You will get so tired of typing the same information over and over again, or copy and pasting, whatever it might be. And you think to yourself, I just uploaded my resume. Why do I have to fill out all this information again? It's because these software packages are crap at identifying information in your resume. And so many companies use this Workday software. It's just terrible. It's honestly probably one of the worst things I've ever come across. And it's a pain in the rear. You would think, with all these companies that there might be one common process. Wouldn't that be great? That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? It never ends, really. It's just literally never ends. The number of boards that are out there, and you just have to keep searching and searching and searching until you'll spend endless amounts of hours parsing through one job board after another, looking at one job posting after another, trying to figure out, is this a match for me? Is this a match for me? And especially if you're early on in your career, you might look at some of these job descriptions and you think to yourself, I don't fit any of that, or I only fit 60% of it. And there's one piece of advice that I'll give you, and this is one of the things that when I'm mentoring people that are moving into tech, that I harp on again and again. If you think you even are a partial match and the job interests you, go ahead and submit your resume. At the worst, you get a rejection email. So what? You've spent 10 minutes submitting your resume, filling out their job thing, and there may have been a chance that you might have gotten it. You never know. So it's worth the effort to just put yourself out there. And obviously, like I say, it's the least effective of the ways of finding a job. Obviously, you want to go through your contacts, you want to go through recruiters. but don't limit yourself to that. You never know when something might come across in another path. So, like I say, if you even think you're a partial match, put yourself out there. It's worth it to make the effort, even if it's just a learning experience. And you will get so many rejection emails. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but during my job hunt, I submitted resumes to at least 300, maybe 350 different job postings. And that's on top of contacts through recruiters, contacts through people that I know. And I had a couple of absolutely fantastic interviews that came out of that experience. I probably got more than 300 rejection emails. And some of those emails came months later. There are some companies that are really bad about that. But it's worth the effort because you never know what you might come across and what might ping with somebody at some point. Like I say, if it's like they say, you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. So take the shot. You never know what might pay off. So whatever the methodology, whether it was through a contact that you made, whether it was through a recruiter, whether it was through filling out forms on a job board, you're going to get into some interviews and you're going to have a chance to talk to people. And I won't go into too much depth on the interview process. But, and then I already talked about preparing for the interview process. Like I say, when you're done with that interview, make sure you write up a summary. Keep track of things. If it's with somebody other than, or even with a recruiter, you should follow up like the next day with a kind of like a thank you. Thanks for talking about you. I enjoyed talking about this and this, and just kind of name a couple of things. And I look forward to hearing from you at some point. If you can leave them on that positive note after the interview, that goes a long way towards impressing them. It may be, okay, by that point, they've probably already decided whether or not you're a good fit to pursue even further or whether or not to reject you. But even if they have already decided, that still leaves them with a good impression. So that maybe, a couple months later or a year later, or in my case, 4 years later, when the opportunity didn't work out last time, you never know what might ping in somebody's brain. And they might remember, hey, I had a great experience talking to that person. And they sent me that great follow-up. They probably won't remember the follow-up, but they'll remember the impression that you left with them. And that's important as part of the interview process. So try your best to leave a good impression after the interview. So let's talk about the interview itself. I've already mentioned there's a couple of different kinds of interviews. You've got your pre-screen interview where you're talking to a recruiter or an HR person or whatever it might be, kind of getting your foot in the door. If you get past that one, then you're generally going to have an initial interview, and that may be with a manager, it may be with somebody who's on the team, one of the other developers. It's generally kind of going to be a cultural interview of some kind where they kind of get to know you, find out a little bit about your background, find out if they feel like you're going to be a good fit, if they like you, and they may combine some of these interviews, of course, and they may be like the fangs and spread them out into 10 different interviews. But generally, you're going to go through 2 to 3 interviews for most jobs, along the process path there. So, you have that initial recruiting interview, you have that next interview, which is generally with the manager or something like that, to kind of find out if you're a good fit culturally. And then they're going to do a technical interview most of the time. They're going to kind of get a feel for your skill set. And most of the time, these kinds of interviews may be with the manager again, or it may just be with some of the other developers on the team, where they kind of ask you some technical questions, get a feel for your skill set, that kind of thing. And if that's successful, and if you left a good impression on the other people that you would be working with, they may make a decision then, or they may want you to come in for just one more interview, or come to one more interview. And that's generally going to be with the final hiring manager, the person that you're going to be working with, or working for, rather. And this, the biggest thing, with interviews, you got to remember a couple of things. First, it's a two-way street. It's you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So talk to them. Ask questions. Follow up on things. Use active listening to make sure that you are understanding the question that they're asking you. If I can't even tell you the number of times as a hiring manager that I would ask a question and the candidate would answer me with something that was completely unrelated to what I had asked them. I had a guy asked him once, what's the thing that you love the most about being a developer? And he went on this like 5 minute discussion of how good he was with this particular technology that we were talking about like 3 questions ago. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, that has absolutely nothing to do with what we were talking about. Why are you doing this? Why are you going off on this tangent? So make sure that you're listening. Make sure you understand the questions that they're asking, and make sure that you're answering the question that they're asking. If you don't feel like you understand clearly what it is they're asking, ask them to clarify. Say, hey, do you mean this or do you mean this? What do you mean by this question? Don't be afraid to ask questions, and make sure that they give you time to ask questions. That's one of the great ways to find out whether the company is going to be a good cultural fit for you. Not just whether you're going to fit into the company, but whether the company fits for you. Look for those red flags as you're talking to people. Do they, to the people that you're talking to, especially when you're talking to other developers and the non-managers, so to speak, do they look miserable? Do they sound miserable? Or do they sound like they genuinely enjoy what they're doing? There's so many times when things would pop out to me as I'm talking to a team member, and it's clear that that person absolutely hates working there. And after that kind of thing, I would say, okay, thank you, but I'm not interested. I don't want to pursue it any further because I don't want to be as miserable as they are. I want to be happy. I want to find a job that I love. And I would hope that you do too. So make sure that when you're talking to these people, make sure that you're asking those questions. Make sure you're watching for those flags, and paying attention to the signs that are there. All right. Well, I hope that some of this has been productive and useful for you. And I hope that some of it will help you in your own job search. And I say, don't hesitate to reach on out to me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to help in any way that I can. And I do, like I say, this industry has given a lot to me, and I generally want to try to give back as much as I can. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully maybe some of this can make your life all shiny too.